says Bitcoin mining host can't block tenant access to its rigs. So, if you guys aren't familiar, there's hosts that basically you can send your miners off to, and then pay them usually a cost per kilowatt hour, and in return they run your rigs. In some cases, maintain them depending on how much you're paying them, etc. And then you get the Bitcoin, you pay the bill with it. Obviously, this big downturn was a massively negative impact on miners, especially miners that were hosting equipment. We covered this last week with essentially, I think actually 2 weeks ago, because we're starting to see, we saw a big dip in the kaspa hash rate, and that was due to a lot of the contracts, at least for a little bit, ending on the Ice River hosting side of things. It came back online. There were probably some deals worked out between the people that own the rigs in Ice River. There could have been maintenance. There's a lot of stuff that could go on, but the idea is like, obviously, if you are, working with a hosting company, there is that potential that you're not profitable. Your hosting bill ends up being more than you actually made, and you get to a point to where you can't afford the bill anymore. And then you can end up in a position like this. It's definitely a position I would hate to be in. I'm always worried about being in this position, right? Because I do have my mining rigs hosted right now, but let's get into it. A Delaware court has granted temporary reprieve to a Pennsylvania Bitcoin mining firm currently in a payment dispute with its hosting company, barring the hosting provider from blocking access and otherwise commandeering the miners' 21,000 rigs at the property. Vice Chancellor Morgan Zern granted a temporary restraining order on March 12th, requested by Bitcoin miner Consensus Co-location and systems owner Stone Ridge Ventures against Mawson Hosting, which provides hosting and co-location services for Bitcoin miners. The firms have been in disagreement over alleged unpaid fees, the terms of their agreement and Consensus plan to relocate, allegedly leading to Mawson blocking the miners' personnel from accessing the site. The firms also alleged Mawson has been operating the rig since February 28th for their own gain after preventing Consensus from entering the premises. Mawson, however, claims they are allowed to use the rigs under the terms of its agreement with Consensus, and they have the right of first refusal for its relocation plans. The Bitcoin miner has been seeking injunctive relief to regain control of their equipment and prevent Mawson from using them. As part of the March 12th order, Mawson is barred from using the hash rate from the miners and will no longer be allowed to restrict Consensus's digital and physical access to the rigs in Midland, Pennsylvania facility. Now, I come from the auto industry originally. If you guys don't know, I was a motorcycle mechanic. And this one's kind of interesting to me because this does go against what I would assume is the case. And there's probably more details to this that makes it a little bit more nuanced than maybe I'm seeing on the face level. But if you're a mechanic, for example, right? And I'm going to read what Hawk says here too. Just from my perspective, if you're a mechanic, what you can do in the case that you have a client that doesn't pay is you can essentially file a lien on the vehicle itself, and then it's called a mechanic's lien, and you take possession of that vehicle and you sell it to cover costs that were not paid for. I would assume as a host you would have that same legal right. Now, Hawk is saying certain companies will mine on machines if the customer doesn't pay. They do this to maintain power requirements. At Terra, we don't do that. It gets sticky with finances. I know companies that do that. Now, that is a thing to bring up. A lot of hosting companies have requirements with their power cooperatives or companies to maintain a certain power level to get the costs down. And so they will put something in there that basically stops them from doing that. So there's two things going on here. One is, of course, actually utilizing the equipment that isn't yours to perform a service to a network effectively, right? But number two, there is the actual recovery of the cost to run the rigs that was not paid by the miners to the host, right? So they're at a loss for that. Obviously, this will have to get settled legally, but this actually goes out. I would have thought personally that this would have been more akin to what you see with mechanics liens, and it appears that that's not what's happening here. So it says that the temporary restraining order is in force until the matter can be heard in a preliminary injunction hearing. A company spokesperson for Mawson told Cointelegraph the company was pleased with the outcome, looked forward to Consensus abiding by their contractual obligations and continuing to work with Consensus. Mawson Infrastructure Group and Consensus Co-Location did not immediately respond to Cointelegraph's request for comment. So this is how it began. In March 6th, or in a March 6th legal complaint, lawyers acting for Consensus accused Mawson of mining Bitcoin with their rigs valued at $30 million since February 28th, generating daily profits of between $100,000 and $200,000 while blocking access to them both physically and through VPN access. Consensus and Stone Ridge signed a co-location agreement with Mawson in December of 2023. They agreed to terminate the partnership by the end of March 2025 with a gradual reduction in capacity leading up to the deadline and a removal process scheduled to begin on March 3rd. Mawson argues that it was owed fees and electricity prepayments for February and March, and its co-location agreement gives it the right to redirect the hash rate of Consensus miners and use the proceeds to replenish the deposit. On its face, it was operative only prior to April 1st, 2024, and only in narrow circumstances relating to the replenishment of a deposit, lawyers acting for Consensus said in the suit. When Mawson began redirecting the hash rate on February 28th, the deposit was fully paid, and in any event, Mawson has stolen hash rate worth many times more than $17,505, Mawson claims. Without jurisdiction, that Consensus owes its purported late fees. It's really, really tricky, and I always say, like, not your hash, not your power, because I think, there are, how do I put it? There's good intentions, I think, with a lot of hosting companies. But when you're dealing with this much money and there's a lot of people involved, things can go awry really, really quickly. I had to finish up a settlement with my previous host already, and that was a big pain in the butt. And it's not a fun thing to go through. It costs a lot of money. You lose a lot of money. I've lost, probably 40 grand just on that one alone. And that doesn't include lawyer fees and all of that, right? And so when you're talking about like picking a good host, make sure you pick one that you know and you trust, obviously. I try to stay away from like recommending hosts because I don't want to be liable for any of that. It's not like a personal thing. It's just it's a tricky business, and there's a lot on the face there, or a lot that's not on the face there, right? A lot behind the scenes that's going on, and each individual situation is going to be different depending on how many rigs you have, what the efficiency of the rigs are, what the power cost to the host is, what their costs to operate are going to be. All of that sort of stuff is going to come into play, right? And I think that in an extremely volatile market like Bitcoin mining, it can go bad really, really quickly. And so it can be extremely difficult to say like who's in the right and who's in the wrong here. It's really, I think at the end of the day, like if you're putting, it's hard because if you're putting So if they didn't pay, but then they mined and made up the fees and then they continue to run the miners, they're putting wear and tear on the machines that could be utilized to resell to make the money back to settle whatever dispute there is, right? And so I think putting a pause on them running the miners is probably the right play if you're looking at this from a legal perspective. Because if you're running it, it's just like putting miles on a car, you're devaluing that miner, right? Well, AFC, you say contracts, but they clearly do have a contract here saying they're allowed to run them and remove access. And the judge has ruled against that, right? So however this ends up playing out at the end of the day is going to set a precedent within hosting in the States, right? Yeah, and Hawk says they personally just pause them and don't run them for that reason. The question is, of course, like obviously if you have that, is that viable for every host or is it not, right? But I would assume that the way you would want to run it, if you could, would be to pause the mining, put a lien on the miners, and then take possession of the miners legally through that realm, because there's already precedent set there from the auto industry, right? So I think as a host, that's how you would want to function, just because there is, like I said, precedent set there already, right? Yeah, you have to have the lean time, says Jazz. I hope you enjoyed this clip from the Crypto Mining Show. If you would like to see more from this particular episode, take a look up here. Don't forget to also subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support me directly, you can go to sonofatech.locals.com and become a member. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next Tuesday.